Welcome to the Business Extra. I'm Mustafa Alrawi, the National's Assistant Editor-in-Chief. Well, this is the first episode of 2023. Thank you for being with us. We're going to talk about the outlook for aviation in a moment with the National's correspondent, Deena Kamel, who's in Geneva. But first, if you like this show, please do subscribe. If you're on YouTube, ring that bell. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the outlook for aviation in 2023. Deena Kamel, the National's aviation correspondent, is in Geneva at the International Air Transport Association's event, which was rounding off 2022. Deena, welcome.
Hi, good morning, Mustafa. Good morning from Geneva, where it is about 0 degrees here, so slightly colder than Dubai. We're about 2 kilometers away from the headquarters of the International Air Transport Association, where we've just spent the last 2 days in media briefings with them, where they've detailed their outlook for the aviation sector into 2023. So lots going on there.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what the 12 months ahead is going to look like, I'd like to kind of set the scene for how we kind of closed out 2022, which was, given what happened to aviation and airlines in the pandemic, was actually pretty optimistic, I would say. Was that the feeling you got in Geneva when you arrived?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, optimism was the key theme that was running through the last couple of days here at the IATA briefings in Geneva. And while the trade body is expecting airlines to incur another loss in 2022, this loss is actually much narrower than what IATA had previously forecast in June. So now airlines are expected collectively to lose $6.9 billion in 2022. And this is an improvement on their earlier forecast of $9.7 billion loss. So things are actually looking better. Passenger demand continues to be strong. COVID-related restrictions over international borders have lifted. This has helped. Pent-up demand has been unleashed. People are just eager to travel. And so this is a much better time for airlines than what they've gone through in the last couple of years.
What's interesting is regionally, if you compare, different parts of the world, the outlook, goes from very positive to quite cautious when it comes to Asia, for example, because China, the COVID is still, related restrictions still linger. Again, in recent days towards the end of 2022, there was announcements of a reduction in some of the tougher measures, which hopefully is a good sign going forward. But still, the fact that China isn't fully back to where some of the other regions are will hurt the business globally.
You're absolutely spot on. And this is one of the main themes that was discussed actually during these briefings. So let's drill a little bit into the numbers for next year and what the regional performance might look like. So IATA is very optimistic about the outlook for next year, despite the macroeconomic challenges that are facing the industry. The Director General of IATA has called it business as usual headwinds. So compared to what the airlines have gone through in the last couple of years, they're used to these type of challenges. Now, in 2023, the airlines around the world are collectively going to earn a profit next year for the first time since the pandemic began. So we are talking about a collective profit of $4.7 billion in 2023. Now, let's put that into context. This is a rather modest number. It's only 1/5 of the profit that they earned in 2019. But still, it's a huge and significant development for the airlines compared to the staggering loss that they incurred over the last 3 years. We're talking about a loss of $186 billion from 2020 to 2022. So that silver lining of finally being able to earn a profit next year is a big deal. However, that recovery, as you well pointed out, is uneven in terms of the different geographies of the world. So what we're seeing is, if we look at a map of the world and how the carriers there are performing next year, North America is actually leading the recovery. Airlines there are going to earn a profit actually as of this year, $9.9 billion this year and $11.4 billion in the next year. They are closely followed by Europe and the Middle East, where these are the only two regions that are set to earn a profit next year. The Middle East, if we look at our region and how that's going to be performing, some good news there. Carriers in our region are going to be earning a profit of $268 million next year. And this is after a loss this year of $1.1 billion. So good news there. Why is this happening? Why are Middle East carriers doing so well? Of course, they are long-haul airlines, and now international borders are reopening on a wide scope, and they're also benefiting from the rerouting of flights away from the Ukraine war. So lots going on in these different regions, but the outlook for the Middle East looks quite positive. However, it is not without its risks.
You mentioned the IATA chief, Willie Walsh, a little bit earlier, who's a well-known industry veteran, and you said that he said we're dealing with business as usual headwinds, which I assume are things like high oil prices, which affect aviation and aviation fuel prices, but also in terms of worries about demand because of the forecast of a drop in economic growth and possibly even recession in various areas. Are these the factors that they're going to have to deal with in 2023?
Absolutely, yes. There's a bunch of geopolitical and macroeconomic risks that IATA had outlined during these briefings. They're very much on IATA's and the airlines' radar. They're going into this with their eyes wide open. So some of the risks to this rather positive outlook that we're seeing next year, where airlines have acknowledged that they still have a long way to go, really, and are watching out for certain headwinds. One of these factors is whether China is going to reopen its borders, given its current very strict COVID zero policy. Now, the outlook that IATA has set out factors in a forecast that China is going to reopen its borders in the second half of 2023. If that prediction does not come true, then that is a major risk to the outlook as IATA sees it. Another risk, of course, is that as we've seen warnings by different organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that there is a major threat of economic recessions, IATA says that if some economies do fall into a recession, then that is going to be a hit for passenger and cargo demand. However, they do see that being mitigated by lower oil prices during a recessionary period. The final risk that they talk about, and this is one that Willie Walsh seemed particularly passionate about when he was speaking, is the fact that airports are increasing fees and charges on airlines. He called it gouging. And there's also going to be plans for taxing airlines to support sustainability plans. So all of these taxes and extra fees are really going to potentially eat away at airlines' profits next year if all of this materializes. The problem, of course, is even while airlines are predicting profit next year, we're talking about razor-thin margins here. In fact, the numbers that we've been given for the profit margins, it's the equivalent of $1.1 per passenger on average. So if you think about it, they're earning on one passenger just the same price as a cup of coffee, really. So all of this economic and geopolitical uncertainty is really something for them to watch out quite seriously.
A lot there to unpack. I mean, I would say that the comments by Walsh about the airports I find fascinating because that's a legacy from the pandemic, when airports and airlines had very different experiences. A lot of the airlines got support, government support or taxpayer support in certain countries, but the airports seem to complain of less support during that time. And of course, everybody who's flown in the last 2 years will know that many airports around the world, there were long lines, whether it was immigration or baggages or whatever it might be the experience. There weren't enough staff, and demand came back so sharply that many uh, hubs couldn't cope, um, and they wanted the airlines to do more, and I guess to pay more, if they wanted things to work. And the airlines blamed the airports, for not handling things well. So it seems that friction will continue in 2023.
100%, and it was very evident in the last couple of days. There's been a bit of a war of words, if you will, between the airlines and the airports just recently, with Willie Walsh, describing the increased airport fees as gouging by these different entities. And in fact, a day later, the Airports Council International, the ACI, responded and said, well, actually, airports have not had the same level of government support that airlines have benefited from during the pandemic. So there was a lot of tension actually about the issue of airport fees. This is a particularly sensitive topic because the airports are also trying to recoup their losses that they've made over the last few years, and airlines, while they're expecting a profit, are also trying to protect these very razor thin margins. So any additional costs, let's say like airport fees, like the increase in jet fuel prices, is really going to have a big impact on these thin margins.
Yeah,
And in fact,
sorry, go on, Deena.
I was just going to raise the issue of jet fuel prices. One of the, and this was another big theme here during the briefings, and one of the things that the IATA chief economist, Mary Owens, has been saying is that even if you do see lower prices for Brent, actually that will not immediately translate into lower jet fuel prices, because there's very limited refining capacity. And therefore, the price of jet fuel is still higher than Brent. And so she was pointing out that the aviation industry, unlike other sectors, will not immediately benefit from a lowering in oil prices because of this refining capacity limitation. And therefore, she says, airlines have no choice but to pass on this cost to the consumer. So maybe that's kind of the bad news for us travelers, is that airfare prices, are still going to maintain their highs, because the demand so far has seemed to be price insensitive. And in fact, the IATA chief economist was saying that the point at which people might start to become more sensitive to these increases in airfares is when unemployment starts to rise. So as we know, employment is at all-time highs at the moment. The minute that changes, the minute people are not working, there's fewer jobs, then that price sensitivity starts to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned a key factor for 2022, which was inflation. I think everybody, whether it was individuals or regarding corporate travel budgets, everyone felt the rise in airfares in 2022. Especially, it was a very sharp contrast because we had gotten used to much cheaper airfares during the pandemic when no one was flying. And now it seems, from what you're saying, 2023 won't see a softening in airfares unless there is, a significant downturn in demand as a result of recession, for example, which, it's not good news for anybody, because even if airfares are cheaper, then as a result of that, corporate travel budgets will be cut back and individuals won't be able to travel as much. So you almost have a catch-22 here. We need a kind of a slow softening in airfares, as there is this kind of slow deflating of an overheated economies. But so far, it looks like we're probably going to see us miss a soft landing on both sides, and we may see a kind of bit of a crash in 2023. But I think everyone should be prepared for inflationary pressures not to immediately disappear in the first few months of 2023. I wanted to come back to to the Middle East region and the Gulf region? Because the end of 2022, with the World Cup in Qatar, obviously there was demand, huge demand. And the year before, we had Expo driving demand, certainly for the UAE as well. And were there any specific discussions as to what would continue to drive demand in the Gulf for our airlines here? You mentioned, for example, the return of long haul travel. Is it just that, or is it other things going on?
No, you're absolutely right. There's other factors at play here, and certainly yesterday we were in media briefing with Willie Walsh for the Middle East and Africa region specifically, and he mentioned a few other factors that could contribute to the growth of our regional carriers here in our area. And he was saying, actually, of course, just to go back to your point, the World Cup is a major positive for the region's airlines. We're seeing shuttle flights from cities like Dubai, Doha, other points in Saudi Arabia. So that's a huge boost. He says this is positive into this year and going into the next. But the other thing he raised as well that would be a positive for our region is the fact that around the world, premium travel is increasing and is improving and is in line with, if not even slightly above, economy travel. And this plays out really well for the Middle East carriers, where you have the likes of Emirates and Etihad and Qatar Airways, who are well known for their premium offerings in their cabins and across their network and across their aircraft. So actually, that increase in premium travel demand is going to be a huge growth booster for them. The other factor that he mentioned is that when China does eventually reopen, this is going to be another amplifier of growth for our regional carriers because of the travel flows between the two regions being particularly strong. Demand is just going to shoot through the roof eventually when China reopens, especially for airlines that are long-haul travel connectors, such as Emirates and Qatar Airways and so on, who are connecting passengers from Asia through their hubs here in the region and out to America, Europe, and elsewhere. So that's going to be another factor for growth going into next year once and if China reopens.
Deena, Kamel, thanks so much for talking to us from Geneva.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's it for today. All that remains is to thank our production team and you for being with us. See you again next time.